Hello and welcome to Insomniac Histories. Imagine standing on the banks of the Nile River, but not the Egypt of the Pharaohs that you know from history books. You are much further south, where the river flows through a landscape of golden desert, granite outcrops, and lush green islands. Around you rises a city of mud brick buildings and stone temples. Towering pyramids, steep-sided and elegant, pierce the azure sky. The air is filled with the sounds of a thriving civilization. Merchants calling out their wares, craftsmen hammering gold and copper, priests chanting in ancient languages, and the constant hum of a powerful kingdom at the height of its glory. This is Nubia, the land the ancient Egyptians called Tarseti, the land of the bow, named for the skill of Nubian archers. This is Kush, a civilization that was already ancient when Egypt was young, a kingdom that would eventually conquer Egypt itself and rule as pharaohs. Yet today, Nubia is largely forgotten, overshadowed by its more famous northern neighbor. Most people have never heard of the kingdom of Kush, of the Black Pharaohs who ruled a Nile empire stretching from the Mediterranean to the heart of Africa, or of the magnificent pyramids at Meroe that outnumber those of Egypt. Tonight, we will uncover the story of this forgotten kingdom. We will explore Nubia before Egyptian dominance, when it was an independent power, a center of trade, wealth, and cultural sophistication. We will walk through its cities, witness its rituals, and understand how this remarkable civilization shaped the ancient world and then vanished from popular memory. This is a story of a proud people who built a kingdom that lasted for more than 3,000 years, longer than Rome, longer than the Byzantine Empire, longer than almost any civilization in human history. It is a story that has been erased, ignored, and distorted by centuries of racism and Eurocentrism. But the evidence is there, carved in stone, buried in sand, waiting to be rediscovered. But before we journey south to the Forgotten Kingdom, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It's a simple and wonderful way to support the channel, and it means a great deal to me. I'm also always curious to know where in the world and at what time you're joining me tonight. So I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. And now, settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade away, and let us travel back to a time of gold and ivory, of powerful queens and warrior kings, and of a civilization that history nearly forgot. Our story begins with the Nile itself, the great river that is the lifeblood of northeastern Africa. The Nile flows north for more than 4,000 miles, from its sources deep in the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean Sea. But the Nile is not one continuous, placid waterway. At several points, the river's flow is interrupted by cataracts, areas of rapids and rocks where the water becomes turbulent and unnavigable. These 6 major cataracts divide the Nile into distinct regions, and they have shaped human history for millennia. Ancient Egypt, the Egypt of popular imagination, occupied the lower Nile Valley from the Mediterranean coast to the first cataract at Aswan. This was the land of Memphis, Thebes, and the Great Pyramids of Giza. But south of the first cataract lay another world, a region stretching from Aswan to Khartoum, encompassing what is now southern Egypt and northern Sudan. This was Nubia, and it was divided into 2 main regions. Lower Nubia, from the first cataract to the second cataract, was the region closest to Egypt. Upper Nubia, from the second cataract southward to the confluence of the Blue and White Nile at Khartoum, was the heartland of Nubian civilization. The landscape of Nubia is different from Egypt. While both are defined by the Nile cutting through desert, Nubia is more rugged, with granite outcrops, rocky terrain, and a narrower floodplain. The cataracts themselves are dramatic features, where the river drops through channels of black granite boulders, creating rapids that are beautiful but dangerous. This landscape made Nubia more difficult to navigate and invade, but it also made it a natural fortress, and beneath this harsh landscape lay treasures. Nubia was rich in resources that Egypt desperately wanted. There was gold, vast quantities of it, mined from the desert hills. The very word Nubia may derive from the ancient Egyptian word for gold, nub. There was copper, used for tools and weapons. There were semi-precious stones, carnelian, amethyst, and jasper. There was hard stone, granite, and diorite, prized for sculpture and monumental building, and flowing through Nubia came the trade goods from deeper in Africa: ivory from elephant tusks, ebony wood, incense, exotic animal skins, and ostrich feathers. Nubia was the gateway between Egypt and the riches of Inner Africa, and this position would define much of its history. Human settlement in Nubia is ancient, reaching back to the Paleolithic era, but organized civilization begins to emerge around 3800 BC, roughly contemporary with the early development of Egyptian civilization. The earliest Nubian culture that we can identify archaeologically is called the group culture, named prosaically after the letter assigned to it by archaeologists. These were the first Nubians to develop permanent settlements, to build substantial architecture, and to engage in long-distance trade. Let us step back in time to around 3500 BC and visit one of these early Nubian settlements. You arrive at a village on the east bank of the Nile, just south of the Second Cataract. The settlement is modest, a cluster of oval houses built from mud brick and stone, their roofs made of timber covered with reeds and mud. Each house is home to an extended family. The houses are arranged loosely around a central area where community activities take place. The people you see are Africans, dark-skinned, with features characteristic of the populations that still inhabit this region today. They are farmers and herders, growing wheat and barley on the narrow floodplain and raising cattle, sheep, and goats. But they are also traders and craftsmen. In the center of the village, you see a workshop where a craftsman is working copper, heating the metal in a charcoal fire and hammering it into tools and ornaments. Copper working is still a relatively new technology, and this artisan's skills are highly valued. Nearby, another craftsman is carving ivory, shaping a tusk into decorative combs and figurines. The ivory comes from elephants hunted in the regions to the south, and it will be traded north to Egypt, where it is highly prized. You notice that the people wear jewelry of remarkable quality: necklaces of shell and stone beads, copper bracelets, and pendants. Their pottery is distinctive, red with black tops, created by a sophisticated firing technique that controls the oxygen in the kiln. This black-topped red ware is a hallmark of early Nubian culture, and it is actually superior in quality to contemporary Egyptian pottery. The village cemetery is located on a hillside overlooking the Nile. You walk up to examine some of the graves. They are simple pit burials, but the grave goods are impressive. The dead are buried with pottery vessels filled with food and drink for the afterlife, tools and weapons, jewelry, and even small copper knives. One grave, clearly belonging to a person of high status, contains an extraordinary array of goods. Dozens of pottery vessels, copper tools, ivory objects, and jewelry of gold and semi-precious stones. This society is already stratified, with clear differences in wealth and status. Archaeological evidence shows that the A group Nubians traded extensively with Egypt. Egyptian artifacts have been found in Nubian graves, and Nubian goods appear in Egyptian sites. This was a relationship of equals, or at least near equals, a mutually beneficial exchange between two developing civilizations. But around 3100 BC, something changes. Egypt unifies under its first pharaohs, creating a powerful, centralized state. The new Egyptian kingdom, hungry for Nubia's resources, begins to exert pressure on its southern neighbor. Egyptian armies raid into Nubia, and Egyptian traders begin to dominate the trade networks. The A group culture goes into decline, and by around 2900 BC, it has largely disappeared. Lower Nubia becomes depopulated, its people either fleeing south, absorbed into Egypt, or simply dying out. This is the first of many cycles in Nubian history. Periods of independence and prosperity alternating with periods of Egyptian domination and decline. But Nubia does not remain subjugated. Around 2400 BC, a new culture emerges, called the C group by archaeologists. These people reoccupy Lower Nubia and rebuild Nubian society. They are herders primarily, raising large herds of cattle that are not just economic resources but also symbols of wealth and status. And further south, in Upper Nubia, an even more impressive civilization is developing. This is the Kingdom of Kerma, and it will become the first great Nubian empire. Let us travel south, beyond the cataracts, to the city of Kerma around 1750 BC. This is the height of the Kerma civilization, contemporary with Egypt's Middle Kingdom, and Kerma is a power to be reckoned with. You approach the city from the north, following a well-worn trade route. In the distance, you can see the massive mud brick structure that dominates the city. A building the archaeologists who discovered it would call the Western Defufa. The word Defufa comes from the local Arabic word for a large mud brick building, but its ancient name is lost to us. The Western Defufa is enormous, rising more than 60 feet high, with a base measuring about 170 by 90 feet. It is made entirely of mud brick, millions of them, built up in a complex structure of passages, chambers, and stairways. The exterior walls are massive, sloping inward as they rise, giving the structure a sense of monumental power. The surface is plastered and painted, probably white or pale yellow, gleaming in the sun. The purpose of the Defufa is debated by archaeologists. It may have been a temple, a palace, or a combination of both, a sacred and administrative center for the kingdom. As you enter the city, you are struck by its size and sophistication. This is no simple village. This is an urban center, home to perhaps 10,000 people, with extensive residential quarters, workshops, storage facilities, and temples. The city is surrounded by massive defensive walls, mud brick fortifications that speak to the military power and constant threat of conflict. The buildings are constructed from mud brick, but they are well planned and substantial. Houses are rectangular, with multiple rooms arranged around courtyards. The walls are thick, providing insulation against the desert heat. The roofs are flat, made of timber beams covered with reeds and mud, and they serve as additional living space in the cool evenings. The streets are narrow and winding, but they are organized into distinct neighborhoods. There is a potter's quarter, where you can see dozens of workshops producing the distinctive pottery of Kerma. This pottery is some of the finest produced anywhere in the ancient world. It is thin-walled, perfectly symmetrical, and polished to a lustrous sheen. The most characteristic type is a black-topped red ware, but even more impressive is the polished black ware, pottery fired in reducing conditions that turn the clay a deep, glossy black. Some vessels are decorated with incised geometric patterns or applique decorations, small clay additions shaped into animals or geometric forms. You see a craftsman at work, shaping a vessel on a turntable, his hands moving with practiced precision. The clay is local from the riverbanks, but the skill required to produce such fine pottery is the result of generations of knowledge. In another quarter, goldsmiths are at work. Nubia is famous for its gold, and the craftsmen of Kerma have mastered the art of working this precious metal. You watch as a goldsmith hammers a sheet of gold, carefully shaping it into a decorative plate. Another is creating gold foil, beating the metal into incredibly thin sheets that will be applied to wood or stone objects. Gold jewelry is everywhere in Kerma, worn by anyone who can afford it. You see necklaces, bracelets, anklets, and earrings, all crafted from gold and often inlaid with carnelian, turquoise, or faience, a glazed ceramic material that the Kerma craftsmen have learned to produce. The market is a riot of activity and colour. Merchants from across the region have come to trade. There are Egyptians, identifiable by their linen kilts and sandals, trading copper tools, linen cloth, and luxury goods. There are traders from the south bringing ivory, ebony, incense, and exotic animal skins. There are local farmers selling grain, vegetables, and livestock. The language you hear is not one but many. The Nubian language is dominant, though we do not know exactly what it sounded like. It was likely related to modern Nubian languages, which are part of the Nilo-Saharan language family, completely unrelated to Egyptian or Semitic languages. But you also hear Egyptian, and probably other African languages from the south. This is a cosmopolitan city, a crossroads of trade and culture. At the center of the city is the palace complex, residence of the ruler of Kerma. The kingdom of Kerma is a powerful state, ruled by a king who commands armies, controls trade, and serves as a religious leader. We do not know what the Kerma people called their ruler. The Egyptians referred to the ruler of Kush as Heka, which simply means ruler or chief, but the Kerma kings may have had their own distinctive title. The palace is a substantial complex of buildings arranged around courtyards. The walls are decorated with paintings and reliefs. The courtyards contain gardens with date palms, sycamore trees, and pools of water, rare luxuries in this arid land. You catch a glimpse of the king himself as he walks through the palace grounds. He's tall and dark-skinned, wearing a long linen kilt dyed with bright colors. Around his neck are multiple strands of gold beads and amulets. On his head is a distinctive cap or crown, the exact form of which is uncertain, but clearly a symbol of his authority. He is accompanied by guards, warriors armed with bows, the weapon for which Nubians are most famous. The Nubian bow is a powerful composite weapon, made from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, capable of shooting arrows with tremendous force over long distances. Nubian archers are feared throughout the region, and the Egyptians will eventually hire them as mercenaries, recognizing their superior skill. The king's authority is both political and religious. He is the intermediary between the people and the gods, responsible for maintaining Ma'at, cosmic order, much like the Egyptian pharaohs, though the Kerma kings developed this concept independently. Religion permeates every aspect of life in Kerma. The people worship a pantheon of gods, though we know frustratingly little about their specific beliefs because they left no written texts. We can infer some things from their art and burial practices. They clearly believed in an afterlife, one that required substantial preparation and offerings. The Western Defufa likely served as the main temple, where priests conducted daily rituals to honor the gods and ensure the prosperity of the kingdom. Animal sacrifice was an important part of religious practice, and cattle were particularly sacred, both as economic resources and as religious symbols. Let us now visit the Royal Cemetery of Kerma, located about 2 miles from the city. This is where the true power and wealth of the kingdom are most dramatically displayed. The cemetery contains hundreds of burials spanning centuries, but the royal tombs are extraordinary. You approach one of the largest tumuli, burial mounds that mark the graves of kings. The mound is enormous, a circular heap of earth and stone more than 250 feet in diameter. At its center is a burial chamber, originally built of mud brick and timber, though over the centuries it has collapsed. When this tomb was excavated in the 20th century, archaeologists discovered something both magnificent and horrifying. The king had been buried in a wooden bed, his body wrapped in leather and covered with gold foil. Around him were thousands of objects: pottery vessels, weapons, jewelry, furniture, and statues. But there was more. Surrounding the king's burial were the bodies of hundreds of other people, sacrificed to accompany the ruler into the afterlife. These were not just symbolic offerings. These were real people, likely servants, officials, soldiers, and possibly family members, who were either killed at the time of burial or possibly entombed alive. Some burials contained more than 400 human sacrifices, making these among the largest mass human sacrifices known from the ancient world. This practice tells us several things about Kerma society. First, the king wielded enormous power, literally holding life and death authority over his subjects. Second, the society was highly stratified, with a vast gulf between the king and ordinary people. And third, the belief in the afterlife was so strong that it justified this mass killing. These people genuinely believed they were serving their king in the next world. The practice of human sacrifice eventually declined, possibly due to changing religious beliefs or practical considerations. It's hard to maintain a stable population when you're killing hundreds of people with each royal funeral. But it speaks to the intensity and power of early Kerma religion and kingship. The kingdom of Kerma reaches its peak around 1650 BC. At this time, Egypt is in turmoil. The Middle Kingdom has collapsed, and Egypt has entered the second intermediate period, a time of political fragmentation. The Hyksos, a foreign people from the Levant, have conquered northern Egypt and rule from the delta. Native Egyptian dynasties control only Upper Egypt, around Thebes. Kerma seizes this opportunity. The kings of Kerma form an alliance with the Hyksos, and together they squeeze the Egyptian kingdom from both north and south. Kerma armies push north, occupying Lower Nubia and even parts of Upper Egypt. For a time, Kerma controls territory that reaches as far north as Aswan, right to the edge of Egyptian heartland. This is the moment of Kerma's greatest power, when this African kingdom threatens to extinguish Egyptian independence entirely. Archaeological evidence from this period shows Kerma control over Egyptian fortresses in Nubia. At one site, Buan, a massive Egyptian fortress, archaeologists found that Kerma kings had taken over the fortress and used it as a burial ground. They built their characteristic tumuli right inside the Egyptian fortifications, a deliberate statement of triumph over their ancient enemy. But this golden age does not last. Around 1550 BC, Egypt reunifies under the warrior pharaohs of the New Kingdom. The new pharaohs, beginning with Amosathathene, are determined to restore Egyptian power and to take revenge on those who had humiliated Egypt during its weakness. The Hyksos are driven out of Egypt, and then the Egyptian armies turn south. The war between Egypt and Kerma is brutal and decisive. The Egyptian pharaohs, particularly Thutmose I and Thutmose III, lead campaign after campaign into Nubia. They push south, destroying Kerma armies, capturing cities, and systematically dismantling the kingdom. Around 1500 BC, the city of Kerma itself is conquered and destroyed. The Great Western Defufa is damaged, the palace burned, and the kingdom of Kerma ceases to exist as an independent power. Egypt establishes direct colonial rule over Nubia, appointing a viceroy of Kush, the king's son of Kush, to govern the territory. Egyptian fortresses are built or rebuilt throughout Nubia. Egyptian temples are erected to Egyptian gods. The Egyptians attempt to Egyptianize Nubia, to impose Egyptian language, religion, and culture on the conquered population. For the next 500 years, Nubia is an Egyptian colony. Nubian resources, particularly gold, flow north to enrich the Egyptian state and fund the temples and tombs that make New Kingdom Egypt one of the wealthiest and most powerful civilizations of the ancient world. The great pharaohs, Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, Ramesses II, all benefit from Nubian gold. Nubian culture does not entirely disappear during this period, but it goes underground. The people continue to speak their language in private, maintain their customs, and remember their independent past. And gradually something interesting happens. The Nubians begin to absorb Egyptian culture, but they also maintain their distinct identity. They adopt Egyptian religion, worshipping Amun, Osiris, and Isis. They adopt Egyptian burial practices, building small pyramids over their tombs. They learn to write in Egyptian hieroglyphs, but they do not become Egyptians. They become something new. A hybrid culture that combines Nubian and Egyptian elements. By around 1000 BC, the New Kingdom of Egypt is in decline. Egypt is weakening, fragmenting once again into competing kingdoms. The Egyptian hold on Nubia loosens. Egyptian officials are recalled. The fortresses are abandoned or handed over to local control. And in this power vacuum, Nubian independence re-emerges. Deep in Upper Nubia, far from Egyptian power, around the city of Napata near the Fourth Cataract, a new Nubian kingdom is forming. This is the kingdom of Kush, the civilization that will eventually conquer Egypt itself and rule as the 25th dynasty, the so-called Black Pharaohs. But that is a story for another time. Let us instead remain in this earlier period, before Egyptian dominance, when Nubia was forging its own path. What made Nubian civilization distinctive? What set it apart from Egypt? despite the long interaction and mutual influence. First, there was the relationship with Inner Africa. Nubia was not just a conduit for African goods reaching Egypt. It was part of Africa in a way that Egypt, despite its location, was not. Nubian culture, language, and population were connected to the African interior, to the Sahel and the tropical regions beyond. This gave Nubian civilization a distinctive character, a blend of Mediterranean and African elements that was unique. Second, there was the emphasis on cattle. While Egypt was fundamentally a grain-growing civilization, Nubia was also a pastoral society. Cattle were not just food, they were wealth, status, and religious symbols. Cattle appear constantly in Nubian art and were central to rituals and sacrifices. This pastoral element connected Nubia to other African cattle herding cultures that stretched across the Sahel and Eastern Africa. Third, there was the military tradition. Nubia produced some of the finest archers in the ancient world. The bow was not just a weapon, it was a symbol of Nubian identity. The Egyptians acknowledged this, calling Nubia Tarseti, land of the bow, and recruiting Nubian archers for their own armies. Nubian military skills would eventually allow them to conquer Egypt itself. Fourth, there was the role of women. Evidence suggests that women in Nubian society had significant power and status, possibly more than in contemporary Egypt. Later Nubian kingdoms would be ruled by powerful queen mothers, the Kandakes or Candaces, who wielded real political and military power. This tradition of female authority may have roots in earlier Nubian culture. And fifth, there was resilience. Nubia was conquered repeatedly, by Egypt, by the Assyrians, by the Persians, by the Romans. Yet Nubian culture and identity survived. The kingdom kept re-emerging, adapting, and maintaining its distinctiveness over more than 3,000 years. Few civilizations can claim such longevity, but despite these achievements, Nubia has been largely erased from popular historical consciousness. Why? The reasons are complex and troubling. First, Nubia left fewer written records than Egypt. The Kerma kingdom appears to have been pre-literate, leaving no texts for us to read. Later Nubian kingdoms used Egyptian hieroglyphs, and later developed their own Meroitic script. But the Meroitic language has not been fully deciphered. Without texts, civilizations become voiceless, and their stories are told by others, often by their enemies. Second, archaeology in Nubia came late. While Egypt has been intensively studied since the 19th century, serious archaeological work in Sudan did not begin until the 20th century. Many sites remain unexcavated or were destroyed before they could be studied. The construction of the Aswan High Dam in the 1960s flooded much of Lower Nubia, destroying thousands of archaeological sites despite emergency salvage operations. Third, and most importantly, there is racism. The Nubians were black Africans, and for much of modern history, European and American scholars could not or would not acknowledge that black Africans had built sophisticated civilizations. Early archaeologists and historians dismissed Nubian achievements, attributing anything impressive to Egyptian influence. The idea that Nubia had conquered and ruled Egypt was particularly troubling to racist scholars, who went to great lengths to minimize or explain away this historical fact. This racist denial has only begun to be dismantled in recent decades as scholarship has become more diverse and as African nations have taken control of their own archaeological heritage. Today, We recognize that Nubia was not a primitive backwater, but a sophisticated civilization that existed alongside Egypt, sometimes as an ally, sometimes as an enemy, sometimes as a subject, and sometimes as the conqueror. The relationship was complex, dynamic, and mutually influential. The story of Nubia challenges the Eurocentric narrative of civilization. It demonstrates that the Nile Valley produced not one, but two great civilizations. It shows that sophisticated urban culture, monumental architecture, and complex religious and political systems developed independently in Africa. And it reminds us that the history we are taught is often incomplete, shaped by the prejudices and limitations of those who have controlled the telling of history. The mud brick defufas of Kerma still stand, eroded but impressive. The pyramids of Meroe, hundreds of them, still rise from the desert sand, steeper and more elegant than their Egyptian cousins. The artifacts of Nubian civilization fill museums, though often overshadowed by Egyptian collections. The archaeological sites are there, waiting to be studied, waiting to reveal more secrets about this remarkable civilization. And the descendants of the ancient Nubians still live in the region, in Sudan and southern Egypt, maintaining cultural traditions and languages that connect them to their ancestors. The Kingdom of Nubia, before Egyptian dominance, was a civilization of gold and ivory, of powerful rulers and skilled craftsmen, of warriors and traders who commanded the gateway between Africa and the Mediterranean world. It was a civilization that built monuments to rival Egypt's, that developed its own distinctive culture and identity, and that survived for thousands of years despite repeated conquests. It was a civilization that ruled Egypt itself, turning the tables on its powerful neighbor. And it was a civilization that has been forgotten, erased from the popular narrative of ancient history, but which is now slowly being recovered, remembered, and restored to its rightful place in the story of human achievement. The Forgotten Kingdom is forgotten no longer, and the more we learn about Nubia, the more we realize how much we have yet to discover. And so our journey through the Forgotten Kingdom of Nubia comes to a close. We have walked through its cities, witnessed its power, and mourned its erasure from popular memory. It has been a true pleasure to be your guide through this remarkable and unjustly neglected chapter of history. Thank you for listening. Until our next journey into the past, I wish you a calm and peaceful night.